Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Battle of Shrewsbury. Shrewsbury. I don't know how you pronounce it in an English accent. Let's learn, guys. Get serious. Original link to the video, top of the description from History March. Fantastic channel. My name is Connor, if you're new. I like to learn things. So, 1403 just screams difficult in me understanding. British history, English history, actually, not even British history. English history around the 100 Years' War to the Wars of the Roses confuses the crap out of me. So this is a 24, almost 25-minute video. Expect it to, like, double that because I'm gonna... Maybe I won't have to rewind so much if I just pay a lot of attention, but ADD can be an issue. Let's get started.
Rebellion rocks England in the summer of...
Listen. Listen to me. Look at me. If you are not ready to learn, you're in the wrong class. Home ec is down the hall. Make me some cinnamon buns or sit in the back of the class. All right? I'm serious about that. Not a joke. If you are not ready to learn or, like, help teach me, you're in the wrong place.
14. Rebellion rocks England in the summer of 1403. Discontented at Lancastrian rule, Henry Hotspur Percy intends to depose the usurper King Henry IV in a clash of arms near Shrewsbury.
So the Reds represent Lancaster rule. Okay.
Opposing him below his elevated position are the king himself, notably assisted by the 16-year-old future Henry V and a larger royal army. 16. Hotspur, though, has reason to be confident. Before his battles stand the ranks of his Cheshire archers. Fame...
That begs a question. What were... Obviously, they must have had lower age requirements. Or maybe they just had, if you were big enough and could carry stuff and were a guy, then, like, you could be in the army.
Before his battles stand the ranks of his Cheshire archers, famed and experienced as deadly marksmen. With these formidable allies and his own reputation for arms, Hotspur dares to hope he can triumph. Can the rebels strike off the head of the Lancastrian snake this day? Only time will tell. As soon the storms of arrows will fly, and a bloody melee will begin at this decisive battle for medieval England. In 1399, Henry of Bolingbroke overthrew King Richard II. Key early Lancastrian supporters had been Henry Percy, Earl of Northumberland, and his son of the same name, nicknamed Hotspur.
Oh my god, there are 3 Henrys already. Oh my god, why?
Earl of Northumberland, and his son of the same name, nicknamed Hotspur.
Hey Henry, hey Henry.
The major power players in the north, alongside the Nevilles. The Percys had politically suffered under Richard's rule, losing key lands and offices to Ralph Neville, while Richard's pro-peace policy towards the Scots undermined their ambitions there too. With Percy opposition, Richard's days were numbered at the start of the century. However, relations between the powerful northern house and the new Lancastrian king were far from rosy. Henry had secured the crown, but his was an insecure grip on the throne. In 1400, the Epiphany Rising was betrayed by the Earl of Rutland and received insufficient support, but did convince the king that Richard had to be disposed of permanently to decisively avert his restoration. The Percys saw their fortunes rise. King Henry appointed Northumberland and Hotspur as wardens of the West and East March. The former was also made constable of the realm for life. Percy influence also expanded outside of their traditional northern heartlands, with Northumberland
I feel like giving the title as ruler of whatever for life just means ruler of whatever for as long as I have the power to ensure you're the ruler. So.
Outside of their traditional life. Percy influence also expanded outside of their traditional northern heartlands, with Northumberland granted the Isle of Man, while Hotspur himself was given substantial lands and responsibilities in northern Wales. In theory, Henry was wise to place Hotspur in this volatile region. With the Glendower rebellion heating up, Hotspur was renowned as a warrior and leader of men. However, though rapid in its ascent, this Percy rise was also equalled by the apparent decline in relations between them and the crown. An area of resentment for the family was in the financial strain of their duties. Both the elder and junior Percy felt frequently underfunded by the crown. Indeed, Hotspur in Wales had been forced to pay his men out of his own pocket. A further bone of contention emerged in the same year when Edmund Mortimer was captured at Pillith. Mortimer was the guardian of the young Earl of March, who arguably had a better claim to rule than Henry himself. Hotspur was related to the Mortimers through marriage and naturally wished to pay Mortimer's ransom. Of course, Mortimer's captivity benefited the insecure Lancastrian regime, and so this was refused.
Does he want the other two Henrys to rebel against him?
Further Lancastrian regime, and so this was refused, further stoking the flames of resentment. Hotspur's desire to ransom his brother-in-law likely compounded Henry's blackening opinion of him. Percy policy in Wales had been geared towards peace, perhaps to free up their attention towards the northern theatre, where, in addition to Neville, George Dunbar, the Earl of March, also posed a threat to their ambitions in the area. A threat to all of these main players in the north was Archibald, Earl of Douglas, and in August of 1402, he led a Scots army into England, ravaging Northumberland, while the Percys assembled their own army. Choosing to confront the Scots on their return journey, while they were relatively off guard and laden with spoil, the clash took place near Wooler.
Why would Douglas not go back this way? Did he know that there was an army here? What are you doing? Am I confusing?
Laden with spoil, the clash took place near Wooler. The Scots had been informed of the approaching English army and had assembled in their traditional Chiltern formations on Hamilton Hill. Packed tightly as they were, the Scots merely presented an excellent target, and the archers of the Percy army shredded their ranks, with the annihilation also resulting in the capture of 5 Scottish earls, including the Earl of Douglas himself.
Seemed a little foolish.
The sweetness of the victory was undoubted for Northumberland and Hotspur. However, elation would soon give way to renewed anger at the king's response. The Percys were outraged at the king's demand that their
Okay, Henry, Jesus Christ. I'm glad I read this one. So, you didn't have... So, you get them on your side, they're with you, and then you don't have enough money to pay them, and they have to go into their own pocket. And then they want this guy freed, and you say no, and now you're jealous that they had such a good victory? Okay, brother.
King's response. The Percys were outraged at the king's demand that their captives be taken into royal custody, contrary to the usual practices of war, whereby captives could be ransomed by the victors. Hotspur, for his part, simply refused to hand over his prize of Douglas. For Henry, these captive Scots were better retained in England than free in Scotland to cause more mischief. Though accounts suggest a subsequent confrontation between Henry and Hotspur, this...
Okay, you can't just say Henry, okay? You need... There are 3 Henrys. If you follow it perfectly, I think I'm doing okay. then it might not be okay, but you gotta clarify.
In England, then free in Scotland, to cause more mischief. Though accounts suggest a subsequent confrontation between Henry and Hotspur, this seems unlikely given the subsequent grant of the Earldom of Douglas, which in truth the Percys would have to achieve through their own military efforts. In March of 1403, the Percy army invaded Scotland to this end and besieged the castle of Cocklaws. That King Henry would move north to support the Percy invasion suggests he was not aware they were on the brink of full-blown rebellion, even if relations were poor. In early July, Hotspur and Douglas broke off from Northumberland's army and headed south to Cheshire. This was a calculated move on Hotspur's part, given the region was a hotbed of support for the deceased.
Wait, what did I miss? What?
Full-blown rebellion, even if relations were poor. In early July, Hotspur and Douglas broke off from Northumberland's army and headed south to Cheshire. This was a calculated move on Hotspur's part, given the region was a hotbed of support for the deceased Richard II. An area also renowned for its skilled archers, Hotspur appealed to the locals to gather at Sandway, where he'd later convince a sizable number to join him, whilst also forcibly conscripting more reluctant followers. When this was done, Hotspur intended to march his army to Shrewsbury, the location of Prince Henry. What is unclear about events in 1403 is the strength of any collaboration.
It's unclear if Owain intended to link up with the Percys, though Hotspur's choice of Shrewsbury as a target indicates this. It is possible this didn't happen given the speed of King Henry's response to the events.
Unclear about events in 1403 is the strength of any collaboration between the Percys themselves and a Welsh prince. A move on Shrewsbury rather than in the direction of London suggests a possible desire to merge with Owain. Why Hotspur and Douglas alone moved south and Northumberland remained north is unknown. The Earl was said to be sick, and Hotspur had assured his supporters that his father's force would join them. However, for whatever reason, the elder Percy did not move to join his son in time to aid him. As for King Henry, on hearing of the Scottish siege, he mobilized and intended to support the Percys. In early July, he had set off. However, as he proceeded, vaguer rumors of Hotspur's betrayal morphed into more solid ones by the time he reached Nottingham. Altering his plans, he was urged by the Earl of Dunbar to head straight for a confrontation, the better to stop any potential linking up of Henry's enemies in Wales. Having dispatched envoys to Hotspur in an attempt to gain an interview, with this diplomatic effort rebuffed, Henry sent word for men from the neighbouring counties to join him on his march. Resting near Stafford on the 18th, it was here that the last of his adherents joined the royal host. Tensions must have been escalating as the royalists passed the ancient town of Wroxeter.
Okay, so I thought this place was kind of a Richard-loving stronghold, but over here wasn't. So near Leicester. Well, I guess that doesn't make... I guess that makes... Okay.
Last of his adherents joined the royal host. Tensions must have been escalating as the royalists passed the 18th. It was here that the last of his adherents joined the royal host. Tensions must have been escalating as the royalists passed the ancient town of Wroxeter and then crossed the Severn at Atcham, closing in on the walls of Shrewsbury by the 20th. While Henry had redirected his efforts towards the west, Hotspur had not tarried, heading towards Shrewsbury from Sandway. While any intended link-up with Owain is arguable, Hotspur's intended reunion with his uncle, Thomas Percy, was not. The third man of the Percy trio, Thomas Percy, the Earl of Worcester, was the effective right-hand man of the young Henry of Monmouth on the Welsh border. A guardian and advisor to Henry, it seems Worcester's deeper loyalty to his family won out at Hotspur's approach. For Hotspur, capturing Shrewsbury would be a great early boost to rebel efforts. However, despite...
It's hard for me to determine how brave of a move that was, because I'm not sure if he saw his relative coming up and thought, you know, well, they're going to beat us here. You know, communication is bad. I'm not sure if he knows the other, you know, Henry IV is coming. So I wish I would know how brave or unbrave of a move that was.
Worcester's defect would
by
be a
the
great
other
early
Percy.
boost to rebel efforts. However, despite Worcester's defection to his nephew's cause, he only took a minority of men from the garrison with him, and Prince Henry crucially remained in possession of the town. Setting about besieging Shrewsbury, the fighting was inconclusive, and despite
What a great spot for a fort.
about besieging Shrewsbury, the fighting was inconclusive, and despite some firing of the outlying suburbs, there was no swift capitulation by the future victor of Agincourt. The Percys had likely not
Let me.
crucially remained in possession of the town. Setting about besieging Shrewsbury, the fighting was inconclusive, and despite some firing of the outlying suburbs, there was no swift capitulation by the future victor of Agincourt. The Percys had likely not expected the royal army to arrive so soon the next day, thinking that Henry was still at Burton-upon-Trent. For over 6 years now, I've been fortunate enough to share my videos with you, but sometimes the long hours cause stress and burn.
Guys, so I'm gonna watch through the sponsor here. If you're interested, okay, you can fast forward if you want, but I'm gonna watch through it. It's his video. If you're interested in this and you learned it through my reaction to this video, just please, original link to the video, top of the description. Make sure to use the promo codes and links from the video.
Out, especially while I care for my ill father. It can be a lot to handle, which affects my sleep and eating patterns, and I find myself socializing less than I'd like. While we all encounter our own hurdles, it's crucial to acknowledge when extra help
Stay
is
strong,
necessary.
man.
That's where BetterHelp, the sponsor of this video, steps in. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who is trained to listen and give you helpful, unbiased advice. First, you go to their site, answer a few questions, and BetterHelp will match you to a professional who has years of experience helping people with struggles just like yours. You can do it all from your phone or computer via phone call, video chat, or messaging, however you feel most comfortable. It's the easiest possible way to start talking to a therapist. Let BetterHelp connect you to a therapist who can support you, all from the comfort of your own home. Visit betterhelp.com/historymarsh or choose HistoryMarsh during sign up and enjoy a special discount on your first month. On discovering the king,
Just let me get my water right there, guys. Okay. We're good.
a special discount on your first month. On discovering the king's approach, the rebels withdrew northwest, encamping near Berwick. Prince Henry, perhaps happier to see the banner of his father than he had ever been, joined the royal host, and they moved to encamp in the fields about Ormond Abbey. For Hotspur and Worcester, they may have vaguely hoped for some miracle of support to materialize from either Owain or Northumberland. However, given the unexpected speed of the royal army, the Percys more likely knew that their best chance for survival lay in deploying to their army's advantage on ground of their own choosing.
Is there a way to flee west and southwest and try and flee towards your potential Welsh ally, maybe?
Given they likely knew at this point that they were outnumbered, Hotspur also required ground to play up the advantage of his elite Cheshire archers. To this end, Hotspur marched his smaller rebel army to a ridge a few kilometers north of Shrewsbury. Surprisingly for such a famous battle, the sources are vague on the exact formations of both armies. However, it's likely King Henry's adopted the standard 3 battles formation, the left under the 16-year-old Prince of Wales, the centre under himself, and the right possibly under the Earl of Stafford. The exact composition and command of the Percy army is equally unknown for certain. Given Douglas's later actions in the battle, as well as his status as a captive of Hotspur, it seems odd that he would have commanded a battle of the rebel army.
Yeah.
Yet, if so, then he likely faced Stafford. Hotspur would have taken command of the centre to oppose the king himself, which leaves Worcester to face off with Prince Henry on the royal left. With the armies arrayed but out of shooting range, the last diplomatic efforts were exhausted. Initially, it seems Hotspur was potentially open to reconciliation, with Henry's messengers being conciliatory in their approach. Hotspur, in response, sent his uncle Worcester to efforts were exhausted. Initially, it seems Hotspur was potentially open to reconciliation, with Henry's messengers being conciliatory in their approach.
I don't know if I would trust.
Hotspur, in response, sent his uncle Worcester to Henry, and the king similarly indicated he was open to talking it all out. However, Worcester instead reported the opposite, bitterly setting his nephew on the path of battle.
What? Why?
Another source has Worcester accused the king of unjustly seizing the crown and ordering the murder of Richard II. Despite offering beforehand to duel Hotspur and even submit the whole business to arbitration in Parliament, such words in reality sealed the course of the day towards a bloody conclusion.
Deus vult. God wills it. All right, I know some people don't like the movie Braveheart, okay? But this makes me think of that battle in Braveheart, like the main battle in Braveheart, where like the two parties are coming together to have some diplomatic talk, and then Mel Gibson as William Wallace comes forward and is just like, nope, leave now or you'll be killed or something like that. I thought of that. All right. I know it's not a great example. I thought of it.
Towards a bloody conclusion. In any case, whatever the exact details of the talks, no agreement came, and with the day by then drawing to an end, it was Henry who was keen to open hostilities, and so the royalists moved forward. Though happily in Scotland,
the next day was a Sunday, which precluded hostilities and could only favor the rebels, who may have hoped for reinforcements or a way to escape.
To an end, it was Henry who was keen to open hostilities, and so the royalists moved forward.
Shoot.
Though happily in
No, sorry, I'm sorry, don't leave.
Going to an end, it was Henry who was keen to open hostilities, and so the royalists moved forward. Though happily ensconced on the higher ground, the prized Cheshire archers of Hotspur's host mirrored the royalist advance, moving slightly forward to within decent range of their foes. At this, the rebels loosed their deadly volleys into the royalist ranks. Though outnumbered that day, the rebel army did boast the possession of Cheshire archers, these experienced men having frequently served in the armies of the 100 Years' War, and even as a bodyguard to the deposed Richard II. With a standard starting supply of arrows at 48 per archer, and these men numbering in the several thousand, they would also have been resupplied throughout this brief archery engagement. And so it's likely tens of thousands of arrows blackened the sky above the terrified combatants in any given minute. These elite marksmen shredding the royalist ranks, while also taking fewer casualties of their own. One source describes Henry's men falling as fast as leaves in the autumn. Given the relatively poor...
Guys, so this was... Because I've heard of a law that all English men have to practice archery or something. And so this is, I'm assuming, when that was in force. And so I hate using too many words like I imagine, assuming, but I imagine that they would be extremely good. Because I'm going to use it again. I imagine, what I imagine as just like normal men with a bow, they must have looked so just used to and a flowed motion that would be beautiful to see if it wasn't in a horrific setting like this. But
men falling as fast as leaves in the autumn. Given the relatively poor quality of protection, if any, the heavy casualties of the Royalists would have been mostly low-status archers themselves. Though Henry's own men replied in kind, it was clear that the Cheshire bowmen had the better of the exchange. Though in theory the higher-status men that day enjoyed the benefit of full plate armor, this did not guarantee their life and limb, as subsequent events would show. With arrows from both sides burrowing into flesh and splintering bone, the scene must have been nothing less than a medieval calamity of screaming men and confused bloodshed.
I think it was Ray Mears or someone who I saw in a history hit video of firing these bows. These were no joke, from what I remember. And they looked like both the size of the arrows and the speed that they went into the target was horrific and terrifying. And to see an enormous amount of capable men with these bows shooting these at you would be nothing short of horrific.
To rebel delight, the storms of arrows had been simply too much for a significant number of King Henry's right. Perhaps initially positioned slightly ahead of the other battles, around 4,000 men buckled and fled. This collapse was so complete that in doing so, these desperate men, sure the king himself could not have survived such an onslaught, even raided the royal baggage in their flight. Correctly believing that the king's fall would likely complete the enemy rout, Hotspur and Douglas now led a general charge down their ridge. Screaming Esperance Percy, the archers and men-at-arms crashed into the dazed royalists. Hotspur and Douglas had the singular deadly aim of striking down the king himself, and given this, the ferocity of the fighting in this quarter exceeded everywhere else. Royalists, Esperance Percy, the archers and men... Screaming Esperance Percy, the archers and men-at-arms crashed into the dazed royalists. Hotspur and Douglas had the singular deadly aim of striking down the king himself, and given this, the ferocity of the fighting in this quarter exceeded everywhere else. Yet while Hotspur's centre gambled all in their charge on the king's position, the king himself caught in the thickest press of the fighting, the younger Henry on the left engaged his erstwhile advisor, the Earl of Worcester, and his division. It was at this stage, if not during the earlier storm of the Cheshire Arch...
He's 16.
It was at this stage, if not during the earlier storm of the Cheshire Archers' onslaught, that disaster threatened the royal left.
Although most archers had joined the melee, and few may still have been armed with their bows to pick off targets, perhaps simply because they had not spent all of their arrows.
Though clad in plate armor, many of the men-at-arms moving towards the rebel right raised their visors, perhaps the better to breathe or sight the enemy. Having done the same, Prince Henry was struck by an enemy arrow, the shaft penetrating his face just below the right eye. At just 16 years old, it was now that the young royal lion would truly show his mettle for the first time. A lesser man may have fallen into darkness or perhaps allowed himself to be bundled safely to the rear. The future victor of Agincourt, however, insisted on remaining in the field. Though Henry...
He's 16! Oh my God. Not just to be in battle, not just to be shot, but to be shot in battle and still have the wherewithal and courage and self-conviction, fortitude to say that stuff is so impressive. It's insane. I'm becoming a Henry V fan.
Reserve insisted on remaining in the field. Though Henry's wound likely prevented him from actually participating further in any hand-to-hand fighting, the prince's shouts of encouragement and mere presence served to stiffen the resolve of his men, urging them on to avenge the injury. If so, urging them on to avenge the injury. If so, his actions were wildly successful, as Worcester's battle was pushed back, colliding and merging with the rebel centre. The fighting on this particular day was fierce in the extreme, not merely because of the stakes involved, but also given the waning light. A strong urgency had driven the Royalists to a deadly desperation, which prevented the usual ebb and flow more characteristic of a battle in this period. The usual breaks in fighting were replaced with an unbroken, ferocious slog. Around the person of King Henry himself, this fighting was fiercest. As aforementioned, Hotspur and Douglas, with around 30 companions, resolved to strike directly at Henry, and their gamble had almost paid off. If Stafford had, in fact, led Royalists' efforts at the forefront of Henry's division, then it may have been now that the Earl fell. Later sources have Sir Walter Blunt, the King's very standard bearer, fall to either Douglas or Hotspur in person. However, though perhaps within a sword's length of victory, the opposing Earl of Dunbar, perceiving the rebels' aim, urged King Henry to withdraw to relative safety. Yet even so, the fall of the King's banner could only heighten rebel hopes and darken Royalist hearts. At this, shouts of joy rang from rebel mouths. However, though daring to hope, in truth, rebel fortunes had already likely collapsed. Around this stage, having penetrated too deeply into his foes, it was Hotspur who fell. His exact end is uncertain. Perhaps like Prince Henry, he too had lifted his visor only to receive a fatal arrow to the face. Other sources simply state he was cut down having delved too far into the press of his foes.
Probably more
Whatever the
likely,
case,
right?
Rebel shouts of Henry Percy King were futile. In answer, the indignant King Henry led a chorus of cries, announcing, "Henry Percy is dead." In the confusion of combat, this perhaps was
I love how there's a physical and psychological war happening at the same time.
still is dead. In the confusion of combat, this perhaps was still uncertain at this stage. However, when no answering cries to the contrary came back, the black truth began to infect the hearts of the rebels. With their leader slain, the casualties heightened during the disintegration and rout. Luckily for the rebels, the oncoming darkness mitigated the extent of the slaughter. There could be no doubt, though, that King Henry had emerged victorious. The Royalist dead numbered around 1,600, with thousands more wounded. Hotspur's army suffered between 5,000 and 6,000 dead. Stafford and Hotspur himself were the high-ranking notable fatalities, though, of course, Henry of Monmouth was also seriously wounded.
You know that it's rare that this happens when I'm watching a history video on a battle, but I respect, I mean, Henry IV is kind of sleazy in the beginning, not the beginning of the battle, the beginning of the video, but where, like, I respect every single main leader and side on both sides. Like, Worcester had balls to do what he did and go for his family, leave the city from, leave Henry V's side, go to his cousin, was it his family? Henry V, obviously badass. The arrow do I need to say anything more? And he was 16. Henry IV clearly didn't shy away from the battle. And Douglas kept to his own. Percy was good. Like everyone on this in this entire battle was like an honorable. Seems like an honorable person, you know. And I like that. It's interesting.
Henry of Monmouth was also seriously wounded. Archibald Douglas had been captured, his second capture by an English army in as many months.
Oof. Hotspur's body was quartered, the pieces sent to the mayors of London, Bristol, Newcastle, and Chester, while the rebel leader's head was sent to York and placed above Micklegate Bar.
Also taken was Thomas Percy, Earl of Worcester, and he was reluctantly executed soon after. King Henry was eager to stamp out the elder Percy's resistance. The Earl of Northumberland had been progressing south on the day of the battle, but on hearing news of his son's defeat, turned his army back towards his own heartlands. Henry moved north to confront the surviving Percy, sending orders for local lords to do the same. Disbanding his army at Newcastle following a failed attempt to seize the place, Northumberland retired to his castle at Warkworth, though perhaps realizing his fate if he did not, he obeyed the king's summons to York. With the failure of his son and brother, Northumberland professed ignorance of the entire endeavor and avoided punishment.
Why were you running?
However, Northumberland would later support further rebellions and was later killed in the Battle of Branham Moor, which finally ended the Percy threat some 5 years after Shrewsbury. Henry of Monmouth, of course, survived his severe wound, the arrowhead having...
They came up with a new, like, I've learned about this, like a new medical tool to like slide and take the arrow out.
Being lodged about 6 inches into his skull. A royal surgeon, John Bradmore, managed to extract the arrowhead using...
Yep, right here. Oh, wine was used to cleanse the wound. They knew about honey being a good antibiotic, right? It never fully faded.
Royal surgeon.
I mean, hey, I don't know if I'd want the scar to fully fade after those events.
John Bradmore managed to extract the arrowhead using a custom-built device. And though serious, the prince would fully recover from the surgery.
Everyone in this conflict seemed like no one was seemed like a coward or dishonorable in some way. That they all seem to just be kind of courageous and capable, and I love that about this.
His father, Henry IV,
even the
would
doctor at the
finally
end
perished just under a decade after Shrewsbury, and by the golden year of 14...
Fun fact, Henry IV had hoped to die in Jerusalem, where he had been once visited. In fact, he died in the Jerusalem chamber, within Westminster Abbey on 20th of March, 1413. The last action witnessed by Owain's enemies was a raid in 1412. His rebellion had effectively petered out years before, though he was never captured alive himself.
The decade after Shrewsbury, and by the Henry IV would finally perish just under a decade after Shrewsbury, and by the golden year of 1415, the Welsh Rising had also petered out, with Henry V taking a more conciliatory approach there. With the Lancastrian monarchy secure at home, the joint victor of Shrewsbury could now set his sights on a still greater inheritance across the sea. If you like what you see, consider supporting my work on Patreon, and you get ad-free early access to my videos for as little as $1. You can also show your support by liking the video, commenting, and subscribing to my channel, as a sacrifice to the algorithm.
I gotta give a sacrifice to the algorithm. Comments do help. Amazing video as always. Keep up the great work. I mean, any comment is just good for the algorithm. Love you guys. Hope you're all doing well. I thoroughly enjoyed that video. That was awesome. it was a bit confusing at times, but I got to give myself an okay, like, I think I paid attention reasonably well, and I followed that pretty well. And that gives me a boost of confidence to keep learning about this very confusing era of history, let alone English history. Yeah, love y'all. Would appreciate any comments down below. You guys are always so good with that. Thank you so much. And any answers to my questions, comments, anything, we'd love to see it. Hope you guys are doing well. See you guys next time. Bye.